Hi, I'm Phil. I'm a psychotherapeutic counsellor and a trauma therapist. Today I'm going to speak a little bit about character styles and how understanding some of the theory around this concept can help raise awareness of just how much control our character can have over our feelings, behaviours and partner choices. And I'll follow this up with further videos describing each of the character styles in more detail, along with how they might have developed, the problems they might cause us, and also how we can work to amend some of the behaviours driven by our character style. So, what's a character style? Well, we can say that it's something we develop in response to our early experiences, which is going to mean that our character style is unique to each of us, but it will usually have similarities to others who have dealt with similar situations in their past. So, in a sense, it's a way of being and a coping strategy that's made up of a series of behaviours, beliefs, traits, impulses, and emotions that we develop to manage and survive our early days. And this is important to understand because how we dealt with the world as children was limited by our lack of size, power, and independence. When we're adults, we have different options available, but we might not be able to take them if our character style controls our decisions. And in a lot of cases, it'll be doing just that because it's unconsciously driven, and our subconscious has a lot of power over our choices. So when we look at character styles, we need to be aware that typically each style is driven by one dominant emotion. Other emotions will factor in, of course, but there will be a driving emotion and it will have a lot of control over our impulses and how we act or respond to certain situations. But for some character styles, what they perceive as being their dominant emotion can sometimes be another feeling in disguise, or what we would call a racket feeling in TA therapy or transactional analysis, which means that without realizing, they might not really be feeling what they're experiencing, and this could set them up to respond inappropriately to situations or even put themselves in danger. Because if your character style doesn't allow you to access appropriate levels of fear, for example, in response to dangerous situations, then what's going to stop you doing them? What's going to stop you putting yourself in the firing line? And the same theory will apply to all emotions, because if we don't have the access or a healthy ability to feel that emotion, then we're at risk of doing things that emotion would have invited us to avoid, or at least deal with in a different way. So the name of each character style is often quite descriptive of the situation or emotion that to some extent defines it. So some examples of the more common types would be the abandoned character, the perfect character, the guilty character, the angry character, the passive-aggressive character, and the terrified character. And each of these styles will have some traits and behaviours that are typical or unique to that style, which makes character identification a little easier, but identifying them isn't foolproof, as some character styles can mimic other styles or even present as completely different character types. And the erotic character, the child character, the adult character, the parent character would be examples of these, and I'll explain these in further videos. I'll give you a brief outline now of the more common character styles so we can understand the theory a little bit better. So when we look at the abandoned character, we'll be identifying feelings, behaviours and impulses that might be typical to people who experience some sort of abandonment during childhood. And this is because the defensive strategies that this character style has developed are organised around the expectation of further abandonment and the management of traumatic historical shame, fear and sadness from the original abandonment, all of which are often split off and to an extent denied. This character often projects those feelings that they're in denial of onto people in their presence. So it might be that their partner starts to make them feel horrendous feelings of abandonment or shame or fear or sadness, but those feelings will typically be the historical feelings that they just cannot attach to the actual event that caused them. They get projected onto someone in the present. And if we look at the terrified character, we'll typically see that this person's fear is based upon a subconscious belief that people are inherently dangerous and that confrontation will kill them. So these people are likely to be heavily avoidant of others, and that might make them very reclusive and definitely be phobic of relationships. And when we look at the perfect character, we're going to be looking at a process that has developed significant ego defences that help it to avoid or remain in denial of the more vulnerable emotions that they had to split off as children, usually because their environment was not accepting of them. Which means that their ego has ways and means of reducing or entirely removing the capacity to experience their shame, guilt and fear. But to do this, it has to either distort the reality of situations achieve a high level of functioning or success, or consistently seek validation to fuel the ego and keep the split off feelings of shame, fear, and vulnerability at bay. And if we look at the guilty character, we'll see someone who is driven by feelings and not ego, because flaws in their character style typically leave them with no means of managing their guilt internally. So their process compels them to help, rescue, or just prioritize doing stuff for others, because as long as they're doing that, those feelings of guilt and fear are reduced, and they can manage their guilt by doing that. But only transiently, because unlike the perfect character who temporarily manages their shame by seeking praise and basking it when they get some, the guilty character, because of deep-rooted insecurities and an inability to access healthy levels of anger, is phobic of praise and struggles to accept it. So where the perfect character will crave praise, the guilty person will be fearful of it. And if we look at the passive-aggressive character, this person has usually learnt throughout childhood that it was hopeless to try to get their needs met or their anger validated when it was appropriate. And as a result, they end up harbouring a huge rage which they're fearful of showing. And to manage this character can make it their life's work to frustrate others like they were frustrated themselves in childhood. And because they've become masters of secretly managing their anger via other people, those being frustrated by them may have no idea of what process they're caught up in. Whereas the angry character is going to be very obviously filled with rage and might be drawn to more antisocial forms of behaviour where it converts the fear and shame it experienced in its early environment into rage and attacks or devalues others to rid those feelings from its body. It might even direct this hatred towards itself if others aren't there to take the brunt. And then there's the secure character who has had little trauma or disruption during childhood. And this character is also useful to look at because it gives us a point of reference to work towards, because if we have strong traits of any of the other character styles, then the options that the secure character chooses might not be the ones that are even available to us. So there are going to be similarities and differences with each character style, and some are going to share their traits with others. For example, a few of the character styles can be passive-aggressive, but for the passive-aggressive character, this trait will be prioritized over others, so it will be dominant, whereas by other character styles, it might just be used on occasion. And also the traits and behaviors of each are going to be more prevalent or disruptive the more anxious, burnt out or tired they become. So like I said, the character styles are each driven by certain emotions, which they all manage in particular ways. And the feelings driving their character can be in or out of their awareness. So for example, the guilty character, their guilt is very much in awareness and they'll feel a lot of it. But what they won't realise is that it's a racket feeling and that they feel it so strongly because they're lacking access to feeling another important emotion, which is typically anger. But the perfect character, who is shame-driven, might totally lack awareness of the levels of shame in their body because their ego is overcompensating to stop them feeling their shame. And they're also likely going to be doing the same with their guilt and fear. And the abandoned character, who typically experiences high levels of shame due to early rejection, often generates or creates new shame because if they do this, they don't have to feel the terror of death by abandonment that they've buried since childhood. And for the terrified character, their fear often overrides anger and shame, which is totally the opposite of the angry character, who typically feels anger instead of fear and lacks the capacity to access guilt, shame and remorse for others. And when it comes to relationships or making partner choices, certain character styles can be very reactive towards or be powerfully drawn to other character styles, which can invite people to be continuously drawn or attaching to people who might not be healthy or good for them. And this is because some character styles will, by their makeup, have avoidant, dependent or anxious attachment styles that could complicate relationships. And this is another area that I'll speak of in detail in further videos. Well, hopefully that was interesting for you, and I'll get to work on some further videos describing each character in a little bit more detail. And in those videos, I'll use more elements of TA or transactional analysis therapy to help raise awareness of those processes, as TA is a really useful tool when it comes to growing awareness of what's going on in our process. Well, thanks for watching and take care, and I'll get some other videos put up shortly. Goodbye.